I'm Michael Sowers, current attackman for the Philadelphia Water Dogs. Training regimen off the wall is the LaceUp. LaceUp's something where the one I have here is 5 ounces. You don't sacrifice form with resistance. I think it applies the proper amount of resistance where I can still keep my form while working on different skills and hand speed. And then when you take it off, it just makes the skills that much easier.
All right, so we're here at ILHQ. We're talking about 2025, the LaceUp Way Ahead rankings, the top 20. Thank you to our friends at LaceUp for helping make this a reality. Kevin Brown, McNear, I'm Terry Foy, and this season is going to be unlike any season in recent memory because every coach I've talked to since fall ball started said some version of, man, we are young. But when everybody is young and everybody is inexperienced, it's not as if they have to play their team from last year. They're all playing each other. But the thing is that there's so many roles available for guys that haven't contributed since they've been on campus. And some of them might be seniors, but certainly underclassmen, that, yes, we don't know what's going to happen. How does that frame how excited you are for the 25 season?
It feels like a blank canvas. You know, it's been, how many years have there been these personalities, the Pat Kavanaughs, the Brendan O'Neills, who have dominated all of the coverage in the sport? It's been a few years now, especially with this COVID extra year that these guys have gotten, that it feels like we've been talking about the same guys over and over again. So it's refreshing, even though I think some of the team names are going to be kind of the same up at the top. It's refreshing to talk about some new faces in some new roles.
You look down the list, and as you mentioned, just we documented it in the post, all these key losses to graduation for all these teams with that pileup year from COVID and what have you. It's really exciting because of the amount of parity that I think we'll see early in the season. I think we saw a lot in the 24 season when teams were trying to figure each other out. But I think it'll more closely resemble the women's season where there was parity throughout the entire season and kind of marked, especially from that BC upset over Northwestern in the championship. Of course, there are staples of getting there the last several years, but I think we're in store for a really good season.
When I look at our top 10 in the way ahead, I have significant questions about every single team on that list. Every single team has serious losses, or in the case of a team like Syracuse, serious questions if that next step is there. So, like, for instance, let's talk about Notre Dame. Number one, all three of us voted on our number ones in our top 20. This was consensus pick for all of us. But Pat Kavanaugh gone, Dobson's gone, Entenmann's gone, Conlon's gone, Napolitano. You go down the list. Are we saying Notre Dame gets the benefit of the doubt because they're the back-to-back champions and they get this as kind of the gift of being champions? You're number one, or is it deserved by personnel?
No, I think it's deserved on the basis of the personnel that they bring back. And there's no question that there are questions. Liam Entenmann was awesome. Can Chris Kavanaugh fill the role that Pat Kavanaugh played? We've already seen Dylan Faison get injured against Texas A&M in the football season. Is he going to be in a position to take a next step? What does it mean for Matt Jeffrey, who's playing football and is one of the top recruits in the 24 class that you might expect to contribute for the Fighting Irish on the lacrosse field? So there are questions, but at the same time, how many games has Jake Taylor lost as a player, right? Like, every time Notre Dame has struggled in 23 or 22, it was because he wasn't on the field. Jake Taylor is back. And I'm not saying he's going to cure all those ills, but as long as there's a guy who you can jam the ball into the middle and he's going to score a ridiculous percentage of the time, I'm not sure the effectiveness or efficiency of the quarterback or the midfielder Dodgers who are drawing slides matters as much as it might if you didn't have Jake Taylor. And we already saw Chris Kavanaugh take a step in terms of his distribution and assist making last year, which was the biggest reason that a year ago we had him as the number 43 player in the class? Or in
37.
37, sorry.
To be fair, if we go back to this, look at the voting on that and who had him higher than both of you guys.
Yes, that was definitely you.
Oh, yeah. Hey, wouldn't anticipate the rise in distribution there, but 16 assists in 23, 37 in 24. Just, yeah, it's unquestioned the leap he took as a facilitator in last year's run. I think more so that, like, he was more important to that offense than Pat Cavanaugh for a lot of stretches. So having him back in the offense, I think more so than Jake Taylor, it's just the depth they cultivated in that midfield. The confidence that guys like Fisher Finley got late in the season. Max Busenkel, Philly represent. Just a lot of guys to be excited about with when you go down that list.
And they might have the best defenseman in the country.
Yeah, they might have the best defenseman in the country. I don't want to gloss over that, but quick to, like, one of my big pet peeves is when teams don't have a lefty attackman. Who do they bring in? Brady Pokorny. Not saying he'll start right away, but I think it might be likely we see him on the field sooner than later. Pokorny, Taylor, Cavanaugh on that end. Ooh, it's going to be fun to watch.
And I mean, like, you know, obviously they lose Entman, and that's huge. But like you alluded to, Sean Light, I mean, is he the front runner for the Schmeiser Award as a sophomore? He's certainly in the top 2 or 3. Kavanaugh, is he going to be the front runner for the tour ton? We put him as the front runner, but again, he's certainly in the top 2 or 3, and I don't think that's even questioned. And then, you know, you fill in the best goalie that's, and this is a bold statement, but the best goalie that's ever played in a Notre Dame uniform, just considering how great their lineage of goalies is, and you replace him with the guy who's the number 1 goalie in this class who just hasn't been able to, you know, get past him in Richard Ellie. So, like, I mean, where's the hole? You know, and then Will Lynch, he's back.
Yeah.
And I think there's been like such a, you know, a few years ago, I feel like he was so overlooked, and his rate of improvement has just been so good year over year that it's mind-boggling to me that there are so many question marks that are already answered, and we haven't even gotten a fall ball for them.
Right. It's really just, can Richard Ellie like step in as that starting goalie? It's by far and away the biggest question they have, and keep up that level of production. They have the best, I think you wrote this, the best LSM duo in the nation, with Greg Campisi coming in, the marquee transfer from Harvard. Will Donovan, one of the most unheralded LSMs in all the land, although I think he might have been a first or second team All-American. So the rope unit is just unbelievable. Ben Ramsey never gets enough credit, even though he does, but it will never be enough credit, because that's just how good he is. And the depth that he cultivated in that position last year really just made them the most complete, but the most impressive depth that we've seen in some time. So, three-peat?
Well, so that's the question. Are they in a tier by themselves, or are there other teams that belong in that tier alongside Notre Dame for the most bona fide championship contenders?
I mean, right now they're in a tier by themselves, and I think the thing is just winning breeds winning, right? And you look at, you know, this confluence of events that led to their first championship, and just, you know, so many years they've been knocking on the door, and then they win it, and then of course they win it back to back. That's just how these things work, right? Once you get the ball going downhill, and look at every win they've had on the recruiting trail, you know, this cycle right now, it's pretty incredible. So I think they are in a tier by themselves because of their talent, but also just because it feels like they can't lose right now.
So if they're in a tier by themselves, and we have Syracuse number 2, where would you say the second tier ends?
So this is, I think we debated before we started rolling here, just the 5 through 6 mark is where I would put that second tier of the challengers to end their chances at a three-peat. It hasn't been done since Princeton in the late 90s, right? Syracuse at 2. We have Princeton at 3, Maryland at 4. I'm really excited to talk about Cornell at 5. I think that is the clear next tier of challengers. If you want to put Virginia in there, I won't really blame you because of the amount of success that they've had in the past. But man, is this a different Virginia group than we're used to in the Connor Schellenberger era.
Well, and I think that's true for Duke as well. So I think, you know, there's probably some blurriness, but for the sake of the conversation, it probably does make sense to isolate 2 through 5 as being that next tier, which is crazy that Duke and Virginia might be considered a third tier program heading into 2025.
Not for like once March rolls around, but February, a lot of questions got to be answered.
But to me, we talk about this next year, and Syracuse is the team that, I remember during the broadcast, like the comments of like, this could be the number one team in the nation going into next spring, things like that. Someone tell me, what has this Syracuse team done that makes it better than scoring 8 goals versus Denver in the NCAA tournament last year?
I think it has to be organic development and improvement from guys who are now juniors that were sophomores last year. And I think, the sophomore leap is something that gets discussed and it's real. But I also I wouldn't undersell the fact that another year of physical development and understanding the flow of the game and the pack coming back to them a little bit. I mean, they scored 8 goals against a Denver defense that I think is going to be returning 0 contributors from that game. So it's a completely different group of teams that they're going to be playing against. So I think if you want like the most specific answer to the question, for me, it would be Michael Leo having more room to explore the studio space. He was one of the best dodging offensive midfielders last year. I don't know if he's going to, nail down that lefty attack role. I'm very interested in what that looks like. But for as dynamic and as exciting as he was against some of the best defenses in the country, it feels like when you consider him alongside the likes of Jackson Burwhistle, Luke Roa, but then even, guys that have already produced a ton like Finn Thompson and Owen Hiltz, there's a lot more that Leo can offer in complement to Joey Spallina.
And Joey Spallina coming off going on right now, the World Lacrosse Box Championships, just like you said, growing that organic leadership and the on-field chemistry and kind of improvement. But I think that leadership aspect is something that Spallina's going to have tons of, coming off with a lot of confidence, representing the red, white, and blue, but also just balling out another summer for Orangeville up there. And of course, box skills don't directly translate the field success in the college game, but guys like Finn Thompson, how is he going to step up as a junior in this offense? And you look at their transfers, Mike Grace might be one of the most exciting defensive transfers for the 2025 season.
Yeah, and coming off injury for him, that's a little bit of a question mark for him, but there's no doubt that he's dynamic and, kind of started his career with the short stick and became one of the great poles and has played at basically every position in every version of the sport. So he's just really, wherever they need him, he's going to find a way to contribute. And I look at Syracuse and I feel like just with the history of the sport, you can't talk about Syracuse without talking about Princeton, right? We have them at number 3. I believe I voted them at number 2. Another one of these teams that just felt like, last year, I wouldn't say it felt like a rebuilding year, but they were just young. And it felt like that they were going into last year with like, okay, this is a great recruiting class. How long is it going to take them, to really hit stride? And it turned out pretty much immediately was what it took. So like, I compare those two teams in kind of this sense of like, yeah, we know that there's talent. Which one's stepping up to that next echelon before the other one?
Well, that's shared DNA too, right? With Jake Stevens, Sam English coming over from the Tigers last year. Sam English will be back in 25. So will he step into more of what that Jake Stevens role was in 24 in terms of being a two-way guy and playing more defense and letting some of the young bucks kind of excel in the offensive end? The Princeton Tigers are always fun. The guys they bring in from a freshman standpoint, like I try to pinpoint which midfielder would break out in the wake of Stevens, Verdaro going to Georgetown, and English, of course. Yeah, incorrectly guessed that it'd be Sean Cameron. Still had a solid season, but Chad Palumbo taking that step from really not playing at all to, if breakthrough player of the year was a college lacrosse award, he would have won it by a landslide.
I do worry, though, about how significant the losses, Pace Billings and Mike Gianfraccaro. That's just like two guys that, Mike G, we know him so well. He's going to be down at North Carolina this year for his transfer year. I'm not sure if, they've had good goalies come into the class. It's just such an unknown, the same way that it is for Notre Dame, of like, okay, you're a great high school goalie. Colin Vickery is the guy I'm thinking of specifically. Being a college goalie, especially, facing someone who's one of the best, replacing someone who's been one of the best in the nation, it is really tough sledding. And Pace Billings, I love everything that he's done. But I take so much solace in the way that, like, Princeton has been able to overcome injuries over the past few years. Like, look at all the D-middies, and, like, there's so many D-middies who are scattered around on the rosters now from Princeton, without the extra year. But, like, half those guys were injured last year, and there seems to be a never-ending stream of guys who can fill these, like, either two-way roles or defensive roles for the Tigers.
Well, to that point, I go back to 22, and I remember one of the things that I was so transfixed by throughout the year was that I think you could have made an argument for 5 different long poles over the course of the season, having been the best player for Princeton in at least one game in like a 15-game schedule. So when you have that level of depth and diversity, then I do think there's 2 things that are true. A, one of those guys was Colin Mulshine. He's now a senior, so I think he's in a position to take on a lot of that burden that you refer to with Billings. But B, you invest in and believe in the internal development such that it's just a conveyor belt of really good polls. And I think that, to your point about incorrectly guessing, so to speak, that it was going to be Sean Cameron and it turned out to be Chad Palumbo, despite Sean Cameron having a really good season, I would feel just as unconfident trying to predict who that next breakout close defenseman or long stick midi is going to be for the Tigers. But it does console some of the concern of what his loss means. I do agree with you on the goalie point, though.
We're still, we've glossed over the fact that we're looking at maybe the best offense in the country.
Well,
to be up there, Nate Kabiri, Chad Palumbo, like you mentioned, Colin Burns, Tucker Wade. We didn't even mention the fact that Coulter McAsee is back because it feels like he's been playing for 1,000 years. And just like if you would have asked me before last season, was he graduating? I would have said yes. It just feels like he's been, the focal point for so long, and he's back.
Well, get ready to feel that way about Kabiri and Burns in 2 years because they're just sophomores and they have already been on the spotlight for some time. But yeah, I mean, Maxey, we've got him as number 4 in the way ahead toward watch, and that feels both right and a little low. I don't know that I would necessarily bump him over Chris Cav, CJ Kirst, or Joey Spallina, but at the same time, if you were to say, like, is the guy who was as productive as he was last year and is going to be flanked by pretty much the same offense that he was last year going to be a Tewaaraton favorite, I would say yes. So to the point about tiers, I think those guys belong in the same tier, and I don't know that the distinctions are very wide. Whereas, on the team side, we might see a 1-team tier and then a 4 or 5-team tier.
Same tier as who?
As the 3 guys that we had ranked ahead of him.
Yeah.
Kirst,
gotcha.
Spallina, and Kavanaugh.
Totally. When you look at the 23 roster, really is midfield heavy, right? Stevens, Verdaro, English, the guys behind them, buying over time. Maxey was the guy on attack. Kabiri comes in, 14 less points for Maxey, but seemed pretty content to give it, buy into that offensive principle of, hey, you're going to have another baller on the other wing, and you guys are going to share touches. So expect more of the same in 25, even with a bigger role for Kabiri as that sophomore leap that we expect. I'm excited to say, is there kind of a race for that third attack spot? You look at the guys coming in. Peter Buonanno from Deerfield. He's really good. I've seen Porter Mackiel a lot play quarterback over the club circuit over the years. Colin Burns, great finisher, great compliment player for Kabiri and Maxey. Not sure you want another ball carrier behind, so just something to watch throughout the fall and when we get to the spring.
Well, especially with the success that Palumbo had as a goal scorer, meaning that you can understand how that role would fit running out of the box, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to start an attack. You said you were excited to talk about Maryland, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's go.
Always.
Let Kev cook.
Just this. So, from the Terrapin team that made it to the national championship of the 24 season, just kind of bewildered fans, right? How did this roster do it after falling short in the first round a year ago to Army. It looked like it was going to be the same type of deal. Kind of a upset, riddled run through the postseason there, right? With beating Princeton, 2-time Ivy League champs, in the quarterfinals, getting over and beating O'Neill and Duke in Hempstead at Hofstra, and then of course that doubling up on Virginia in the semifinals was also crazy. We ran out of steam in that championship game, but a lot to be proud of. So you lose Ajax Sabatello, third overall pick in the PLL. That's going to be the most glaring difference between last year's roster and this. The freshmen that they bring in, one, Spencer Ford, day one contributor. The midfielders that they've cultivated the next few recruiting classes, but especially this one, Johnny Gardner and John Draley is the one I'm thinking of. Thank you. Just the amount of transfers that they've had. We ranked them, in our transfer class?
Number one.
Number one in the LaceUp.
Much to Terry's disagreement.
So maybe some debate there, but just the 6 that they're going to roll out from an offensive perspective for Maryland fans, there's a lot to be excited about after a year where you kind of struggled watching Maryland at points. They just struggled to score a lot of games, and they kind of put it together in that postseason run. But watching these guys, see how Armitage fits into the offense. Matthew Keegan is a guy a lot of people are excited about coming over from Binghamton, and lesser known talent from kind of a school that goes under the radar a little bit, but he's got the quarterbacking skills and maybe a little more boost to his step a little bit compared to a guy like Eric Maliver post injury, but just a lot to be excited about if you're a Maryland fan.
You said when you mentioned Ajax that's going to be the biggest difference, that we're going to have to see. I think you're selling short the impact of Luke Weirman on this team, in the sense that will Maryland be able to manufacture wins as well without him, guaranteeing you a certain level of face-off competency. I do agree about your point at the midfield, and Noah Armitage and Jack Dowd, Salisbury. He just feels like a guy that belongs at Maryland, and I think anyone who's at Maryland would understand what that means, in the sense that I think he's going to have a great, he's going to make that great oh man, these D3 guys can play kind of impact on the game this year when he's in Maryland. But I have concerns about the face-offs, which is why I think might be the biggest thing that they need to figure out. One guy that I think is really their defense with Ajax, AJ Hernandez comes in from Navy. He's a guy that, I think coming out of high school, people thought, this is a guy who can be an All-American type player. Can he play at that level? That changes Maryland's calculus significantly if he can guarantee that level of play. And then Peter Lake is the freshman who, he can step in right away. So if they come in and shore up the defense, maybe that ties them over a little bit with the face-offs until they figure that out. Yeah,
if Logan McNaney's back, a guy like Will Schaller, I want to shout out. I think he's going to elevate his game to be more of an eraser. But you're spot on with the face-offs. You can't guarantee 60-40 in your favor possessions from the stripe anymore. So that's going to be huge.
In my memory, Luke Weirman had a little bit of a down year. He ended up as the number one face-off guy in the country at 62.9% at the end of the season, and
he was hurt all year.
Right.
It was him being in or out, or was he going to be at 100%, was a storyline the entire year, it felt like.
And I think that it's not just about production, but it's also about the certainty, right? Mm-hmm. And so the peace of mind, the way that you can build a game plan, and everything that goes along with that. And to the point that you made about Princeton shooting out of the gate, I covered their loss to Maryland, and Luke Weirman was inevitable, you know what I mean? And the notion of getting enough possessions in order to be able to come back into a game where you fell behind early was just impossible. So yes, huge weapon. I agree with you that while Ajax Abatello was excellent and certainly brought a lot to the table outside of just his on-field production, in the same way that I feel like Colin Mulshine might be able to take a little bit of what Pace Billings leaves behind for Princeton, there are a handful of guys, whether it be, AJ Larkin or, to your point, maybe even AJ Hernandez or whomever, that can kind of grab the baton and just be 80%, 70% of what Ajax Apatola was. Whereas, at the Faceoff X, there's a more significant question.
My philosophy on Maryland generally, though, is they should never be ranked in the preseason less than 4, because it's just the same way that Luke Weirman, is inevitable, is the word that you used. The Maryland Terrapins under John Tillman are inevitable. They are going to be in the mix at least a quarterfinal level, probably more, no matter who the personnel is. So you might as well just slot them in there somewhere in the top 5, even if they lose every player on the roster. Maryland's just a top 5 team, and that's just the gospel of college lacrosse.
Let's move on and talk about the team that we have, number 5, Cornell, coming off of a disappointing end to last season. But at the same time, we talked about Joey Spallina's development in the box game. CJ Kirst has had a similar type of offseason, playing with the USA Sixes early in the summer, and then now playing with the U.S. box team. And for me, while I agree that Chris Kavanaugh should be the preseason tournament favorite for a variety of reasons, I do think CJ Kirst should be the projected number 1 PLL draft pick. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, is the proxy for just being the best player. And so, in that way, should the team with the best player be ranked that low? Well, they have to. You asked the question, what is better about Syracuse than the team that got held to 8 goals by Denver in the NCAA quarterfinals? And this Cornell team loses a lot. So what's better about this Cornell team than a group that felt shorter of their goals than that?
Well, hopefully added defensive efficiency, rather. Just the amount of shootouts that they would get into last season really bit them in the butt. Like they had seemed like 3 games of the year against Syracuse, another 18-17 game against Notre Dame. I'm forgetting one.
Denver early in the year.
The Princeton one where they finally came up on top with the long pole, Matt Dooley goal. But we know their offense can score in bunches. CJ Kirst is back. Michael Long is back. Hugh Kelleher is back for another season. This team is equipped to figure it out offensively. 2 of the best freshmen last year ended up being Wertheim and not Wertheim.
Yeah, Willenfirth and
and
then Goldstein.
Ryan Goldstein, one of the fastest attackmen already at his young age. So it really just comes down to defense. Can you figure out the goalie position between Wyatt Nust and the freshman from last year?
Matt Tully.
So,
but also,
and you got to add in
Timmy Piacentini, a New Balance All-American who's coming in as a freshman. Similar pedigree to Tully that way.
Can he shore up things, anchor, and that's a tough task as a freshman. You're asking your highly ranked freshman come in there and hey, we were the 29th ranked defensive team in our adjusted defensive efficiency ratings last season. Only other team below them that was playoff team, Utah, and they got the AQ. So got to shore up that end of the field if they want to remain competitive.
For all those shootouts they were in, though, their last game this season against Penn, they only scored 9 goals, and it came down to not being able to beat Penn goalie Emmett Carroll and kind of their lockdown defense. So I agree with you. Obviously, their questions are on the defensive side of the ball, but it's funny how these games work out sometimes, right? You never really know. But I kind of put them, and I guess it's fitting because their game was so close and memorable, in a little bit in that Syracuse category, like you started this with, of I don't necessarily know. It's harder to project just how these guys elevate their game each year. I think we know the personnel in the sense of we know these guys are good. Do they take that next step to go, to a deep NCAA tournament level?
All right, let's go to the next tier.
Starting out with Virginia, the post-Connor Schellenberger era, McCabe Millen overtaking the primary quarterback role in this offense. You lose not only Schellenberger, the all-time great in program history. Peyton Cormier, the NCAA all-time leading goal scorer. Sure.
That was what I was going to say. I dispute it being the Connor Schellenberger era because to me it was the Schellenberger-Cormier era. And that's where, and then that's before you even consider the fact that they also lose Cole Kasner,
Right.
who is, one of my favorite defensemen in recent memory. So I think that there are a lot of pieces with a lot of imports that they've got to figure out. And it's easier for me to imagine Millen filling in for Schellenberger's production, but I don't see any way on this team that's going to score the number of goals that Peyton Cormier scored. Is there a guy that can score 9 goals against St. Joe's in the first round of the NCAA tournament on this squad? Probably, but who is it? And is it going to emerge with consistency? That might be the distinction between a tier 3 and a tier 2 NCAA title contender.
They do have one of my favorite transfers, though, in this class in Johnny Hackett, coming from Bryant. Just the speed and presence that I think he brings to the midfield was something that they lacked last year. I think you kind of saw, like you said, it was the Cormier, Schellenberger show for a lot, and they could have used just that better midfield presence. So I feel really good about him. But I also do disagree with you in the sense that, this was Schellenberger's team. Just everything that it's not so much what the production, which the production was obviously awesome, but he just captured the vibe of this team for so long. And it seemed to everything flow from him in terms of the work ethic, the way that they approach the game. So I'm excited, though, for Millen to kind of take that role because I do think he is capable of it. I think that the minute he stepped on campus, it felt like he was, assertive and working his hardest and ready to step into that role. And now that he fully gets it, I do think that he's going to be, we have him at number 5 in the Tewaaraton preseason watch. I think he's seriously in that mix. If Virginia's contender, it's going to be because he has one of the best seasons in college lacrosse.
Right. If he's in that mix, it means Virginia is at or even close to that same level, right? They've had success integrating lefty midfielders into the offense before. Thomas McConvey, I think Charlie Bertrand. Now you get two of them. Johnny Hackett, Charles Balsamo coming over from ACC rivals Duke. This would be a fun offense. Patrick, a lot of guys are just waiting in the wings the last few years too. You bring in a guy like Sean Brown as an incoming freshman. A lot of things to be excited about if you're a Cavs fan.
You brought up Duke, so let's go there next. Was it the Brennan O'Neill era, or was it the Brennan O'Neill, Dyson Williams era? Either way, it's a new era in Durham.
Well, the first sentence of our write-up on the website says, an era ended at Duke with the graduation of Brennan O'Neill. So, he's the guy that's cast a shadow over college lacrosse the last 5 years. I'm not saying he's been the best player in college lacrosse the entirety of that time, but he has been the most noteworthy player and at times has been the best player in college lacrosse. And we've seen in the pro, at times has been a freak at the pro level and obviously an international as well. So just that, that whole, it just leaves room for a new identity for Duke completely. And, like Virginia, I think that maybe there's not as clear of a Millen kind of steps into the Schellenberger role. I don't think it's as clear of a who becomes the Brennan O'Neill on this team. But like Virginia, there's a million talented guys on this roster, and it's just a matter of putting them into the spots and giving them the opportunity to shine because they haven't had it the past few years.
Yeah, for me, it's welcome to the Andrew McAdory show. Get him back down at attack. He switched to midfield this past year to make way for Josh Watt. He had a great season, right? You bring in a few other transfers, that the two Blakes, Aiden from Cornell, Graham from Harvard, and from the Ivy League. Guy I'm really excited about is a guy coming from Richmond, and Luke Graham. He can score flat out and do it in kind of variety of different ways too. I don't think a lot of fans are too familiar with his game, so Eric Maliver is obviously the big name coming up from Maryland, but I like Luke Graham making the biggest impact on that offense end.
The one thing with Maliver, though, is I think it's reasonable to expect him to be a lot better this year than he was last year. just given the nature of his injury, right?
Totally.
I think that's going to be just whether it's just, actual, like he's physically better or just the confidence of playing another year with the injury and also a change of scenery. I think he's going to be, what you can expect from him is a much higher ceiling than when we saw last year with Maryland.
And I made the point when talking about Virginia about losing not just Schellenberger and Cormier, but also Cole Kastner. And I would say the same is also true for losing Kenny Brower, except probably even to a greater degree. I think Kenny Brower was more important for Duke's defense than even Kastner was for Virginia's defense. And so, to the earlier point or conversation about Maryland and Princeton having guys that can step into that role, I have a few more questions about who on Duke's roster can really take ownership of what Brower did and guard opponents' number ones in the ACC. If there's something that offsets that, it's I think that they're a little bit more sturdy in the goal with Patrick Jamison coming back. I know that, he wasn't as consistent throughout the year as he looked solid when the year started. And then the other thing is they have horses at the defensive midfield. And Abe White is as good as any of them. And so I think that takes a lot of pressure off when it comes to the combination of guarding opposing number ones. If you're not going to have to worry about sliding and everything that goes along with having a good, deep, short-stick DMD group, then I think that is really nice. And then the name that we haven't mentioned that I think might end up emerging as one of the most significant is Ben Johnston. Sophomore midfielder who looks like he has legitimate midi of the year qualities. Maybe not in 25, but in his remaining 2 years after that, is the type of player who, in conjunction with whatever role they find for Andrew McAdory and whatever role they find for all these incoming transfers, they're going to have to figure out how to get the best out of Ben Johnston. And if they do, then it's going to go a long way toward making sure that Duke is as good as they can be.
Yeah, you add in Ben Johnston, a guy who didn't see the field as a freshman much, Tomas Delgado, highly ranked by us coming out of high school, two horses in the midfield. Aiden Blake, another just unit.
And another guy who's going to benefit from getting farther away from his injury.
Big time. Same type of deal. This is why it's so important to just hit home runs in the recruiting cycle. You lose Kenny Brower, you add Nicholas Menendez, the top-ranked defenseman in the class. He, just a lefty eraser, much like Kenny Brower, day one starter.
Bold. I don't know where this third tier ends, but let's just talk about the rest of the top 10 as a group. We've got Yale at 8. The storyline for them is going to be getting Chris Lyons, Leo Johnson, and Brad Sharp back, in addition to Machado Rodriguez, who played the majority of the year and was one of the best faceoff guys in the country, but didn't finish the season due to injury. At number 9, you've got Johns Hopkins, who probably loses more than any other team, but does bring back a fair amount, specifically Russell Melendez at the offensive end, Scott Smith at the defensive end. And to your earlier point about my dispute around Maryland being the number one transfer class, it was largely because in bringing in Patrick Hackler and Jack Montfort, who could bolster the middle of the field, particularly the short-stick D-midi group, and then Luke Stout, a goalie from Loyola, who will contend to start right away. I think Hopkins did a bang-up job of addressing their specific needs, even if they brought in a smaller number of individuals than some of the other groups that were contending. And then number 10, Penn, who had a win over Duke in the regular season, and in some ways had similarity, kind of a similar season to Yale, maybe not with as big high-profile injuries. Probably graduate a little bit more, maybe bring back like a little bit more from the standpoint of familiarity. And for me, they were they and Penn State were Penn was the kind of last team out, so to speak, of the at-large selection process for the NCAA tournament. So your thoughts on those three teams. Do you agree with that order, having Yale 8, Hopkins 9, and Penn 10?
I do. I think mostly because we've seen Yale be the best equipped of the three to deal with losses. They dealt with it all last spring with the amount of personnel losses they lost to season-ending injuries. You mentioned it right out of the top. Chris Lyons, Leo Johnson back in this offense is going to be just what they need. But they show depth everywhere, from guys like Cashman Cole stepping up. Cole went down to attack, and thrive down there.
Alongside David Anderson.
Alongside David Anderson, he's back as that finisher if he can just jet to the crease coming out of the box. We'll see what they do with it, but I like them just from the track record they've proven from being able to overcome losses.
Terry, you know the personnel a little bit better than I do, but what will prevent them from having the 36th most efficient defensive rating in the country, which is, in this list of 20 teams that we're talking about, the second worst of all of them?
Yeah. So the question is whether or not it's possible based on how fast they play offensively, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of an air raid football. Are you always going to get caught up in, you think about the early 2000s Texas Tech teams, right? And basically what the Big 12 became over the course of the intervening decade, like every game was going to be 55-45 and you just had to be the team that scored 55 points. Is Yale always going to win 17-14 and they just have to make sure that they're the team that scores 17 goals because that's how they want to play? I don't think that it's a personnel question this year. It's, in my opinion, not goalie play. I think Jared Paquette is a good enough goalie to, if they were playing stylistically differently, be the goaltender for the 10th most efficient defense. Even their close defensive personnel, I thought, were good enough at guarding that their issues came in killing possessions. It's a different skill set. I don't know. I don't know if there are personnel answers on the table. I think it's more so, are there holistic changes to the way that they play stylistically? If that's the goal, does it need to be the goal? Can you win at the level that they want to win at with maybe not the 36th, but 26th, the 22nd most efficient defense? Kind of depends on what you're doing at the faceoff X and how efficient your offense is.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've mentioned Matt Brandow and him. Which, to me, I think speaks to the confidence that we have in Yale's ability to keep the train moving. You think of like, oh man, Jackson Morrill's gone. You think of Ben Reeves is gone. You think of Matt Gibson's gone. They're fine. So I think you can kind of parlay that onto the defensive end as well, of like, you're confident in the personnel. It's just a matter of, schematically does it work out for them.
Hopkins, the Blue Jays, Angeles, Degnan, Peshko, Grimes, Dunn, Martin, Juronsky, Avilas, Raposo, Stabner, Zulik, Erlich.
It's a lot of guys.
Why should Hopkins fans be optimistic about this season?
They missed their chance. Like, this was such a senior-laden team. We had them on the cover. Are they back last year? Couldn't get past the quarterfinals against a really good Virginia team, of course, and what I think was one of the games of the season in that double overtime finish. But I'm not as optimistic on this panel as maybe another guy here, but I think their transfers are really exciting. Patrick Hackler and Jackson Montfort coming from Yale are going to make huge differences in the middle of the field and defensively. And Luke Staub making the rare cross-street transfer from Loyola to shore that position up is also huge. So while you graduate a lot, you also hope Russell Melendez can kind of regain the form that he had in 23 rather than kind of taking more of a backseat to Angeles and Degnan last season.
Of all the names that you said, and they're significant and they're awesome players, I think it speaks to the roster construction a little bit that I wouldn't really describe any of them as star players. I think we even had this discussion at the beginning of last year, maybe when we were doing the cover, of like, we know that Johns Hopkins is going to be preseason one of the top 5 teams in the country, but we don't know who their star player is. So that gives me a little bit of hope of like, yeah, they're losing, for lack of a better term, faceless personnel. And it's the next wave of the next faceless personnel come in there. I do think that Jacob Angelis' loss is very significant, and figuring out who's going to be kind of the maestro on offense there. Is it going to be like Jimmy Ayers? I don't know. But I think that they are a team that, isn't really built around one or two personalities and built around kind of the whole. And if you do talk about the guy who like at least has most personality in the way that he plays it's a youngster that's still on the roster, Hunter Chauvet. I think just like the way that like, he's got that like he's going to be the guy that blows up on TikTok, kind of like flash to his game.
Mac O'Keefe shots.
The Mac O'Keefe shots.
I would push back on that. I think Scott Smith is I think he's kind of the heart and soul of the team, and I think his return, which was in question at points over the summer as he went through the medical appeal process, was a huge factor in why I'm about as optimistic as I am.
Right, but I also will contend that like I don't think he's a star in the way of like most casual lacrosse fans might not even come up when you talk about the Princeton. But he speaks to just the way that Johns Hopkins now runs its program under Coach Milliman of like, we don't need stars. Like, we just need guys who are going to do the job and fit the personality of the team, not the personality of themselves.
The other guy who has star potential is Matt Collison. Because when you score overtime game-winning goals in successive weeks, and again, to the earlier point about Ben Johnston, I would say, Matt Collison has midfielder of the year potential, and he's a junior, so he's closer to having to get there if he's going to get there. And the way in which he should have, the ball in his stick and be able to initiate possessions. Your point of, calling Jimmy Ayers a maestro, I think was the right term. And I do see him as kind of the most logical successor. I think Hunter Chauvet taking in that Garrett Degnan role, and then hope and expectation that by virtue of whatever physical limitations he might have been carrying last year, Russell Melendez gets back closer to the player he was 2 years ago. And then obviously, speaking of coming back off injury, Brooks English, who got injured early in the season last year, if those five guys are what they have shown they can be at their height, then I don't see much of a step back offensively. And then that's where you become way more reliant on newcomers defensively to fill those roles and complement Smith.
Well, speaking of newcomers, maybe the biggest loss of the whole program wasn't even on the field. It was on the coaching staff, right? Losing offensive coordinator John Crowley to become a head coach over at High Point. Like, what does this offense look like, principle-wise, scheme-wise, without? It's going to be interesting.
No question. I don't think we know the answer to that. I do think that it's interesting to see how Pete Milliman and Brian Kelly approach this kind of collaborative process of coaching offense that they've talked about as being the plan relative to maybe more of a singular view that Crawley implemented kind of at the behest or with some measure of advisement from Milliman, because Pete has an offensive background and that's kind of where his point of focus, so to speak, would have been before being a head coach.
This discussion, I think, just tells me that yes, it's a long list of names that people graduate, and yes, like that's why we were so hype on them beginning of last year, was because of all these names. But this is just a roster that there's just so much more than meets the eye. That once you kind of go in deeper, you realize like, oh yeah, this guy's a contributor who just for whatever reason didn't have a good year last year. Or, oh yeah, this guy was injured. There's a lot more depth here than maybe people realize.
All right, let's wrap up the top 10 and talk about Penn. Notable losses include Will Shipley, Gabe Fury, Robert Shane, Arceri, Blake. Bringing back Ruben, Walsh, Smith, Mulligan, Mullane, Keel, Till, Lavelle, and Carroll. That's a strong senior group. And then in terms of underclassmen contributors, Skane, Hoffman, Provost, Eldridge, and Till. What are your thoughts on the Quakers, Kev?
Just having Brendan Lavelle, one of the best close defensemen in the nation, and for my money, for most of the year last year, I think Liam Enneman asserted himself in the postseason and certainly large stretches of April. But Emma Carroll is just in a different tier of what I think is, from a PLL perspective, a great goalie class. When you look at Jack Frassion, Logan McNaney, and Mike Gianfrancaro, other guys are in that mix, but it all comes down to Emmett Carroll with how much he kind of saves the Quakers. And you've talked about it, Matt, with how the Penn defense kind of structures themselves to, maybe more than any other goalie, they have trust in him to save these shots.
Yeah, I mean, a coach showed me a shot chart of him once, and the saves that he made are just saves that goalies are not supposed to make. So Penn is allowed to play defense in a way that is risky. And that's why you get a guy like Brendan Lavelle being able to do the things that he does, is because they have the ultimate safety net at Emmett Carroll. He's just the guy that he's going to make the freak save right on the doorstep more often than any other goalie in the country. And that includes someone, like Entebet and these other guys that we talk about. So I think that is such a huge asset in the way that they can play. And when we're talking about we've talked about all these teams in the Ivy League, and we've talked about so much of these are teams that score 17 goals a game and have these just crazy offenses, and maybe they're a little bit defensively deficient. Penn's the opposite, right? Penn is going to be able to is Penn the team that's going to make sure that Yale only scores 11 goals in a game, or same thing with Cornell, and then inch their way through on the other end and get just enough goals to win the game. They've proven that it works, and they certainly have the personnel, particularly with those two, Carroll and Lavelle, on the back end. But I think a lot of the two players that I'm most interested in are kind of the maturation and growth of Griffin Skane, who I think you started to see it last year. He had something around 15 goals last year and a bunch of assists. And Leo Hoffman. I want to see how much they take the next step and make this offense a little bit more deeper and dangerous.
Losing James Shipley, you lose Gabe Fury, who's kind of that big man next to Sam Hanley. You might have, but he's maybe not just as fast, but that explosiveness you get with those two guys that you mentioned. Griffin Skane is going to take that next leap, and Leo Hoffman, we'll see if he can do that as well as a sophomore. But you really like what you saw when it came to Tynan Walsh stepping up his assist totals in that more of a quarterback role, where I thought maybe Ben Smith was going to step into him, maybe after watching some fall ball scrimmages last offseason. Now it's Tynan Walsh, and not a lot of really explosiveness maybe to his game, but he reads the game so well that he just always makes the right read and makes the right pass, sort of like a Logan Wisnauskas type for that offense.